Michael sat in his home office, surrounded by the scent of leather and old books. He was engrossed in a report that seemed endless, but his thoughts constantly drifted from the numbers, returning to Sarah. Through the glass wall that separated him from the world, he could see her in the garden, smiling as she watered their hydrangeas. The soft evening sun touched her hair, making it look like liquid gold. This sight was the best reward for Michael after a long day at the financial company where he worked, closing multi-million-dollar deals and making decisions that affected the lives of dozens of people. His own life was like a perfectly tuned machine, a successful career, a beautiful house in a quiet Chicago suburb that they had decorated with so much love, and an ideal wife who was his main source of strength. Michael was certain that happiness wasn't some ephemeral concept, but a tangible reality that he had built himself, step by step. Their relationship had started 8 years ago in a small downtown cafe. He was still a student, and she was a waitress working to pay her tuition. Michael was struck by her eyes from the very first moment, full of sharp wit, sparks, and a special kind of warm light. Unlike his previous girlfriends, Sarah never tried to impress him. She was simply herself, and that captivated him more than anything else. He remembered how they used to dream about the future, sitting on old, worn chairs in her tiny apartment. "We'll live in a house with a big garden," Sarah would say, "and we'll get a dog," he would add, and they would both laugh, knowing that it would happen exactly that way, because they were both willing to work for that dream. And now, they were living that way. They had a house with a garden, their golden retriever, Max, slept by the fireplace, and their life seemed to be the embodiment of that very dream. Their routine was a source of calm for Michael, the anchor that held him steady in the turbulent sea of his workdays. In the mornings, they would drink coffee together, discussing their plans for the day. Sarah always made him breakfast. She knew he liked his oatmeal a certain way, with a little honey and some nuts. Before he left for work, she would be sure to kiss him on the cheek and say, "Have a good day, my love." This simple ritual was a reminder that at the end of the day, he would return to a place where love and harmony reigned and where he was awaited. Sarah was his main support system, his best friend and his greatest love. They never had big fights. Their disagreements were always resolved over dinner or during their evening walks with Max through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. He trusted her completely. It wasn't just trust, but an unshakable belief that his wife was his person, his other half, and that they were looking in the same direction, that their desires and dreams were one and the same. Michael was certain that their love story was something special, something that was very rare. Sometimes when they watched movies, Sarah would gently squeeze his hand, and he felt that this tender gesture said more than 1,000 words. I saw how she cared for her parents, how she helped her brother who had just started college. These qualities only strengthened his faith in her. Sarah wasn't just his wife, she was the embodiment of kindness and integrity. He thought about their next step. They had already discussed the possibility of having children. The idea that they would have a small copy of the two of them filled his heart with warmth and anticipation. Michael felt that his life was a perfect puzzle, where all the pieces fit together seamlessly, and he never once thought that one of them could be a fake. He rose from his chair to go to her in the garden, to simply hold her and feel that everything in his world was truly so perfect.
That evening seemed like another perfect moment, but a small, inconspicuous detail had crept into his routine, a detail that would later destroy everything. Michael returned home to an unaccustomed silence. Usually by this time he would hear the faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen or Sarah's laughter as she talked on the phone. Today, the house was empty. On the kitchen counter lay a note. "Running late at work, big project. Love you." He was used to things like this. Her job in financial consulting often required overtime. He brewed himself some coffee, which smelled so familiar and comforting, and sat down at the table to have dinner. It was then that his gaze fell on an envelope lying next to his plate. It was addressed to Sarah. Michael frowned. He wasn't in the habit of touching her mail, but his eyes were drawn to the handwriting. It was unfamiliar, messy as if written in a hurry. It wasn't an official letterhead, just a beige envelope with no identifying marks other than an illegible address. The recipient's name was also written by hand in large block letters. Jessica Evans. Michael slowly placed his cup on the table. The heart in his chest, which had been beating steadily and calmly a minute ago, began to pound erratically. Who was Jessica Evans? Maybe she was a colleague, but why had he never heard of her? And why had a letter for her arrived at their home address? With every passing second, his curiosity morphed into alarm. He flipped the envelope over again. There was no return address, just a post office stamp from another city, a completely unfamiliar city, several hours' drive from Chicago. Michael tried to calm himself down. Maybe it was some kind of mistake. Maybe someone just got the address wrong. But deep down, he knew that wasn't it. He picked up the envelope and took it to his office, where he closed the door, as if to prevent this small intrigue from getting loose. Michael sat at his desk, holding the letter that seemed so innocent, yet doubt was already taking root into his soul. He wanted to just throw it in the trash can to forget about it, but his mind wouldn't let him rest. Again and again he ran through every possible scenario. It could be anyone, a distant relative he didn't know about, an old high school friend who simply sent the letter by mistake. But then why did it say Jessica Evans? Why not just Sarah? And why hadn't she told him about it? All of his trust, which had been so unwavering, began to slowly but surely crumble. Every thought led him to the same conclusion. Something was wrong. Something in his perfect world didn't align with reality. He held the envelope up to the light, trying to see something inside. It seemed to him that he could see a medical logo. Michael's heart skipped a beat. His hands trembled as he carefully, trying not to tear it, began to open the letter. He had to know. He had to know the truth, whatever it was.
Michael unfolded the letter, and his world, so perfect and orderly, instantly collapsed. It was a form resembling lab results with the logo of a clinic in that very unfamiliar city. His eyes scanned the lines, searching for a name and a date. Patient, Evans, Jessica, age 32. Yes, it was her. The age matched Sarah's, and Michael's heart stood still. Below that was a medical conclusion, written in complex terms that Michael didn't understand. He ran through every possible option in his mind. Maybe these were the results of an examination for one of her relatives he didn't know about? He tried to find a logical explanation, but then his gaze fixed on one phrase, positive result, and below it in parentheses was written, pregnancy, 10 weeks. Michael's world exploded. There was no sound, just a deafening silence that rang in his ears. He felt his heart seize, his blood drain from his face. He reread those words again and again, trying to convince himself it wasn't true, that it was just some kind of horrible dream. But reality was cruel. Jessica Evans, pregnancy, 10 weeks. He knew it wasn't his child. He and Sarah hadn't been trying for a baby in the last few months. They hadn't even been trying. He tried to breathe, but his lungs seemed to refuse to work. The pain was unlike anything he had ever read in a book or seen in a movie. It was the pain of betrayal. He crumpled the paper in his fist, and it crumpled weakly. All their recent conversations, all her excuses about working overtime, replayed in his head. "We're so busy with the project," she had said. "I have to go on a business trip," she had explained. He had believed her. He had believed every word. And she, all this time, was living some other life, with some other man. He tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't obey.
He sank to the floor, feeling as if his house, which had been his fortress, was turning into a battlefield. His thoughts were a tangled mess. Who was the father of this child? How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to his face and he had believed her? Tears welled up in his eyes. He had always considered himself a strong man, but now he felt so weak and lost. He was willing to forgive her anything, even if she had just had an affair. But a double life? A child with another man? This was too much. This was a betrayal of a scale he couldn't even comprehend. It felt as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff with a bottomless abyss below. Michael felt his perfect life, his ideas about love, marriage, and trust all come crashing down. He couldn't find a single rational explanation for what had happened. Their entire life together now seemed like a grand, meticulously planned performance, and he was the only naive audience member. Suddenly, he heard the front door open. It was Sarah. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly hid the report and tried to compose himself. He had to act as if nothing had happened. He wasn't ready for this meeting. Not now. He didn't know what to do.
Michael sat across from Sarah at dinner, but he felt as though an abyss separated them. She talked about her day, about her colleagues, and a new project, and he just nodded and smiled, mechanically bringing his fork to his mouth. None of her words registered in his mind. He could only see one thing, her face, so familiar and dear, but now just a mask. Behind that mask was Jessica Evans. He wondered how many other secrets she was keeping. Her every movement, every laugh, every look seemed like a carefully rehearsed part of a play. He felt a cold, icy rage growing inside him. He wanted to shout, "Who are you?" But he held back. He knew that if he revealed himself now, he would lose everything. It would be easy for her to deny everything and walk away. No, he couldn't let her get away with it so easily. He needed proof, the truth. After Sarah had fallen asleep, Michael quietly got up. He knew there was no turning back. His heart was pounding, but his hands were surprisingly steady. He began his search. First, he went to her office. He checked her work bag, only documents, pens, a wallet, nothing suspicious. Then he tried to turn on her work laptop. The password was simple, their wedding date, but it yielded no results. No hidden folders, no suspicious emails, no traces. Michael felt a slight disappointment, but didn't give up. He knew that if Sarah was smart enough to lead a double life, she wouldn't leave clues in plain sight. The thought of her old phone came to his mind. He remembered that a few months ago, Sarah had bought a new smartphone and put the old one away in a box. They stored their old things in the closet in the basement. Michael quietly descended the creaky stairs, each step echoing in his head. In the darkness, he found the right box. It was filled with old things, souvenirs from trips, postcards, old clothes. At the very bottom, he felt a small object wrapped in fabric. It was Sarah's old smartphone. He returned to his office, holding his breath. Sitting at the desk, Michael turned on the phone. It wasn't locked. The phone book was empty. Photos and messages had been deleted. That was logical. She wasn't going to leave clues. Michael was about to give up when his eyes fell on a small icon in the corner. It was a messenger app, but not the one they usually used. He tapped on it, and the app asked for a password. Michael felt his heart sink again. This was what he was looking for. His hands trembled. He entered every possible combination until one of them worked. It wasn't a birthday, not the year they met. It was a random combination of numbers. He opened the messenger. There was only one chat. The contact name was Jess. Michael tapped on the chat, and an entire world opened before him. He began to read. Every word was like a knife in his heart. "How are you today, Jess?
"Your husband didn't suspect anything?" a strange number asked. "Everything's fine, Robert. I'm okay. He's so naive. He'll never know." Michael closed his eyes. His entire life had been a lie. He picked up the phone, and it trembled in his hands because he was terrified to read on. But he couldn't stop. He had to know. He had to read everything.
Michael sat in his office. The phone in his hands vibrated like a living thing, and every line in the chat was a new blow. He no longer felt pain, just numbness and a cold, gnawing emptiness. His perfect marriage, his quiet life, his trust, it all had been scorched to the ground, leaving behind nothing but a desert of ashes. He read the correspondence, and with every message the lie became more tangible and monstrous. He learned the name, Robert. He wasn't just a lover, he was a partner. The man with whom Sarah, or as Michael now understood, Jessica, was building her second life. The messages were filled with details. "Robert picked me up from the station. Robert and I watched that movie you liked." They talked about everyday things, about shared plans, about the future. That very future that Michael thought they were building together. But the greatest pain was that Sarah kept mentioning the house, their house. She called it our little house in Albany. Michael knew that city. It was in New York, hundreds of miles from Chicago. His brain, accustomed to analyzing financial risks, now tried to piece together the fragments of her lie. She went there on business trips. Her staying late at work was in fact traveling to him. Every time he missed her and counted the days until her return, she was spending time with Robert. This thought burned him from the inside. Michael scrolled further down the chat. He found photos. In them, Sarah was beaming with happiness. She was hugging Robert, sitting with him on the couch. But these weren't just photos. There was someone else in them. Children. 2 little girls, about 5 and 7 years old. They were running through a field, laughing, sitting on Robert's lap. In one of the messages, Sarah wrote, "I miss you and the kids." He felt his breath catch. Children. She had another family. This wasn't just an affair. This was a meticulously planned, long-term lie that had been going on for years. This was more than just cheating. It was a betrayal of his very essence, of his trust. He spent the rest of the night replaying everything he knew about Sarah in his head. Her parents, her brother. Were they part of this act too? He remembered her talking to them on the phone, telling him about them. It was all a lie. He had a chilling thought that she never went on business trips. She just left for Albany. And her job, which she talked so much about, was probably also part of the deception. Michael spent a few more hours checking every detail, every name, and every fact he could find in the chat. He found Robert's social media profile. There were photos of Robert with the kids. There were also photos with Jessica Evans, the very same woman who hugged him, Michael, every evening until she left on her business trip. Now Michael had no doubt. He felt empty and hollowed out. His perfect life was a phantom, and his wife was a ghost who was living a completely different life. He knew the whole truth now. He knew that Jessica Evans was Sarah, and she had another family. He clenched his fist so hard that his nails dug into his skin. His heart was no longer broken. It had turned to stone, and that stone demanded retribution.
Michael's rage was not blind. It was cold and focused. His brain, accustomed to complex financial calculations and risk analysis, was now working with incredible efficiency, piecing together the fragments of his shattered life. He felt like a detective who needed to gather irrefutable evidence for a conviction. He couldn't just go and scream at her. He needed the truth, the whole truth, backed by facts that she couldn't argue with. The next day, pretending he needed to work from home, he began to act. He gained access to their joint bank accounts and credit cards. At first, nothing seemed suspicious. Groceries, utility bills, gas. But then he noticed, every time Sarah went on one of her business trips, there were strange charges on the credit card.
payments for hotels and small motels on the highways, bills from restaurants in Albany that she had never mentioned. And most shockingly, he found monthly transfers to a bank account registered under the name Jessica Evans. These transfers were regular and significant. He realized that she was funding her second life with the money they had earned together. Michael felt his face turn to stone. He accessed their family car's app and checked the trip history. His heart started to pound. Routes, hundreds of trips. Every time she said she was going to visit her parents or run errands, her car was on a highway that led in one direction, towards Albany. On the map, he could see her car turning off the highway, entering a small town, and then stopping on a street marked Maple Avenue. It wasn't just an address. It was her house, her second life. He took screenshots of every route, every stop, every detail that could serve as evidence. He decided not to stop there. He went to her social media pages. There were many photos of them together, happy and smiling. Everything seemed normal. But Michael knew there had to be another, deeper layer. He began to scroll through the profiles of her friends and relatives, trying to find Robert or Jessica. He found Robert, and on his page, he saw what he was looking for: happy family photos, Robert and Jessica Evans, and 2 children. They looked just like the photos he had seen in the chat. He zoomed in on the photo. He recognized Sarah's eyes and her smile. It was irrefutable proof. The last step was the most painful part. He decided to find physical evidence. He searched the entire house, every closet, every box. He was looking for something that shouldn't have been there. He found it in an old box under their bed. It was secured with a small lock. He broke it open. Inside, he found a small photo album. It contained photos he had never seen. Sarah hugging Robert on a beach. Sarah with the kids in a park. Photos where she was wearing a wedding dress and standing next to Robert. Photos from their second wedding. And at the very bottom of the box, he found a small envelope. Inside was a key to an apartment in Albany and a property deed in the names of Jessica and Robert Evans. Michael held up the key. It was heavy, symbolizing the full weight of the lie he had just uncovered. He no longer felt rage, only a cold determination. He had everything he needed. He was ready.
Sarah returned home, her cheerful laughter filling the silence. She carried a grocery bag and a package from her favorite clothing store. "I'm home, darling," she called out happily. Michael was standing in the living room with his back to her, looking out the window. There was nothing in his posture that betrayed the storm raging inside him. He was as calm as the ocean after a storm. "Welcome home, Sarah," he said in a level voice without turning around. She walked up to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and rested her head on his back. "Is something wrong? You're so quiet." His hands gently covered hers, but she didn't know that beneath that tenderness lay a cold determination. "No, everything's fine," he lied, and the lie now felt like part of his new self. They had dinner in silence. Sarah talked about her work, about an upcoming meeting. She asked him about his day, about Max, their dog. Michael answered in monosyllables. He watched her gestures, her smile, her eyes in which he had once seen his destiny and now saw only emptiness. He was waiting. He was waiting for her guard to drop, for her to feel safe. He allowed her to feel like the victor, an innocent victim of circumstances, who didn't know that her enemy was already sitting across the table from her. When they had finished their coffee, Michael said, "Sarah, we need to talk." His voice was so calm that it alarmed her more than any shout would have. She put down her cup. "Is something wrong, Michael?" He didn't answer. Instead, he went into his office and returned with a small cardboard box. He placed it on the coffee table between them.
Sarah looked at the box, then at her face, and for the first time that evening a question appeared in her eyes. Michael slowly opened the box. His movements were precise and deliberate, like a surgeon making an incision. The first thing he took out was a small leather-bound photo album. He opened it to the first page and placed it on the table in front of her. The first photo was of her, Jessica Evans, hugging Robert on a beach. Sarah went pale. She looked at the photo, then at Michael. All emotions were reflected on her face at once: shock, disbelief, horror, and finally, realization. "Michael, this is—" she started, but he raised his hand, stopping her. Next, he took out a small envelope. He pulled a key from it and placed it next to the album. Then he took out a printed map with a route marked from their house in Chicago to Albany. A small red dot on the map indicated their house on Maple Avenue. A fear he had never seen before appeared in Sarah's eyes. She clenched her fists, her lips trembling. How did you, she whispered. Michael knelt in front of her, looking her directly in the eyes. His face expressed nothing but cold, absolute resolve. "I know everything, Sarah. Everything. From beginning to end. I know about Robert. I know about the children. I know about your house. I know about you. And about Jessica." These words were not an accusation. They were a verdict. He had finished his monologue. He had given her enough evidence for her to understand that he wasn't joking. He didn't say anything else, just watched her, waiting for her reaction. There was nowhere to run, nothing to say. Her perfect world, which she had built for years, collapsed in an instant, just as his had.
Sarah didn't try to deny anything. There was nothing to deny. Her body slumped onto the sofa, and her eyes, filled with tears, were fixed on Michael, who stood before her like an unyielding rock. She looked at him, and for the first time in years, it seemed to her that she saw him as he truly was, not a naive husband, but a man whose life she had destroyed. Words burst from her like air from a punctured lung, full of pain and despair. "Michael, I don't know where to begin. All of it. It was a lie, from the very beginning." She faltered, trying to find the words, but her voice was a mere whisper. "I didn't want it to be this way. When I met you, I was happy. You were everything I dreamed of. But it was so perfect that I started to suffocate. I had no choice. I always had to be perfect. The perfect wife, the perfect colleague, the perfect daughter. I wasn't allowed to make a mistake. When we got married, it got even harder. You had your work, your friends, your world, and I only had you. I wanted something for myself, something that would be only mine. It started with small things. First, I just lied about my work. Then I lied about my family. And then I met Robert." Her voice grew quieter, and Michael felt an icy fire ignite in his soul. He listened, not blinking. She spoke of her trip to Albany, of how she met Robert, who worked in a completely different field, who was simple and open. With him, she could be herself. She could be Jessica. "I felt free. I could be who I wanted to be. We fell in love. At first it was just an affair, but then I realized I couldn't live without it, without my other life. I wanted to have everything at once, and I was so sure that I could pull it off." Michael barely managed to stop himself from screaming. This was a confession not of love, but of selfishness, of how she had used him, their marriage, to build her own world where she was free. His pain was not from her cheating on him, but from the cynical way she had done it. "And the children? Who's the father?" he forced out. Sarah lifted her tear-filled eyes to him, and her face contorted in a grimace of pain. "Michael, we don't have children." A silence fell. Michael felt his head spinning. What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice full of desperation. "All of that?
That's part of the lie, too. I couldn't have children. I never could. It was discovered when I was 20. In that chat, those were messages from Robert. He has children, but they're not mine. I was just pretending they were mine to be a part of his family. I was pretending to be a good mother, a good wife, she sobbed. I wanted to have them. I wanted it to be true. Michael felt all his rage drain away. All that was left was emptiness, an emptiness that was even more terrifying. He looked at her, at this broken woman who had confessed to the most terrible lie. She didn't just cheat on him, she cheated on herself, on her essence, on her soul. He no longer felt rage, only pity, pity for the pathetic wreckage of the woman he had loved. And in that moment, he realized he didn't want to know anything more. He understood everything. He stood up, picked up the key, and walked toward the door. She had nothing left to say. He had nothing left to hear.
Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but Michael no longer saw pain in them. He saw them as a manifestation of her selfishness, her manipulation. It was all part of her game. He no longer felt pity. He felt an emptiness. Michael looked at the key that lay on the table like a small, shining symbol of betrayal. "You say you were suffocating." His voice was quiet, but it had a cold steel edge to it. "You wanted freedom. And what did you do? You built yourself a new prison, an even stronger one. You pretended to be someone else. You lied to Robert. You lied to your kids. You lied to your friends. You lied to yourself every single day. You thought that was freedom? You thought living a lie was liberation?" Sarah sobbed, trying to reach for his hand, but he pulled his away. "Don't touch me, Sarah. I don't know who you are." Her eyes widened in horror. "Michael, I'm still your Sarah. This was a mistake. I can fix it." He laughed bitterly. "Fix it? Do you know what you've done? You didn't just cheat on me. You stole my life. You took 7 years away from me that I thought were real. You stole my dreams, our dreams. You made me an accomplice in your lie without even asking me." His voice grew louder, but it was still under control. "I believed we would have a family. I thought about children, about our future, and all the while, you were planning a life with another man. You built a different reality. Tell me, Sarah, when you looked at me, did you feel anything at all, or was I just a convenient shelter?" Sarah's tears turned into a torrent of despair. She couldn't answer his words. They were like hammer blows, each one shattering her defenses. I loved you, Michael. I always loved you," she cried, and there was genuine pain in her voice. "You can't love. Love is trust, it's honesty, it's respect, and you don't know what that is. You built your freedom on the ruins of my trust. You thought you could have it all, our life, our love, and your other life. Did you think I was so stupid that I would never find out? That I would just sit and wait for you to decide which one you liked better?" She fell to her knees, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Please, Michael, don't leave. Let's talk." But he wasn't listening. He understood everything now. His rage had passed. All that was left was the boundless emptiness she had left behind. He leaned down, picked up the key from the table, and placed it in her palm. "This is yours. I don't know what you'll do with it, but our life is over." He turned and walked toward the door. "Michael, please don't leave," she cried, but her voice was lost in her own sobs. He didn't turn back. He just walked forward. He left the house and closed the door behind him. The lock clicked, and that sound was the final chord of their story. It wasn't just a door. It was the boundary between his past and his future. He left her there, in the floor, in the ruins of her lies, and felt nothing anymore. No pain, no rage, just cold. After the door closed behind Michael, Sarah was left alone in her empty world. She didn't get up immediately. She just sat on the floor, clutching the small, cold key that symbolized everything she had lost. The silence in the house was deafening. Every object, every photo on the wall now seemed to mock her grand lie. She didn't feel like crying. The tears had dried up, leaving only salty trails on her face. She slowly got up, her movements mechanical. The house, which she had loved so much, now felt like a prison, and she was a captive with nowhere to run. Her first thought was to call Robert. She needed his support, his voice, his comfort. She needed at least one of her lives to remain whole. She dialed his number, her hands trembling. "Robert?" was all she could say, but he cut her off. "Jessica? Some man just called me. He said you're his wife. He told me everything. I don't understand. What does this mean?" There was no rage in his voice, only confusion and pain. In that moment, Sarah understood that her deception had also collapsed on the other side. Robert felt the exact same way as Michael. She had betrayed him just as much as she had betrayed Michael. Her world was splitting into two, and she was losing both halves. She tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. "I don't know who you are, Jessica. I don't know who I loved. Don't call me again." He hung up, and her last hope vanished. The next blow came from her family. Her mother, always so calm and loving, called her. Her voice was like cold steel. "Sarah, what are these foolish games? You told us you were coming to see us, and we're hearing from some people that you're with someone in Albany? Is your husband looking for you? We don't know what to tell him." Sarah felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Her mother knew about her trips, but had never asked why. She thought her parents simply trusted her. She was wrong again. Her mother was her accomplice without even knowing it. Now that Michael had started digging, her entire family was also under attack. She checked her phone. Dozens of missed calls and messages from friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Her secrets were out. She saw a message from her boss. "Sarah, I need to talk to you. Call me as soon as you can. We have some problems with your report from Albany." She understood. Her lies were not only personal but professional. Her career, which she had built for years, was also in jeopardy. She could no longer pretend. There was no one who could help her. Her two lives, which she had so carefully kept separate, had now converged at one point, and that point was a total collapse. Sarah walked to the mirror. She looked at her reflection. Who was she? Sarah, the perfect wife? Or Jessica, the free woman? She had no answer. She was nobody. She had deceived everyone. Michael, Robert, her family, her friends, and most importantly, she had deceived herself by believing her own lies. She was devastated because she had lost more than just a marriage. She had lost her identity. Michael spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. The stale smell of cigarettes felt strangely calming after the suffocating scent of lies that had permeated his home. He didn't sleep. He thought. His brain, accustomed to analyzing big data and calculating risks, was now working on the most difficult task of his life, to destroy what he believed was his life, and to do it with the least possible loss. He knew he couldn't let his emotions guide him. Anger and pain were luxuries he couldn't afford. Now he needed a cold, calculating strategy. In the morning, without eating breakfast, he went to see his old friend, David, who was a well-known divorce attorney. David was a tough but honest man. Michael told him everything. He spoke without emotion, dryly, as if he were recounting someone else's story. He showed David the bank statements, the GPS routes, the photos, and the copies of the documents. David listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each passing moment. When Michael finished, David looked at him and said, "Michael, I've seen a lot of cases, but this, I've never seen anything like this. This woman is a genius of deception. Fortunately, you proved to be smarter." David drew up a plan. The first step was to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards so Sarah couldn't withdraw any money.
Michael did it immediately from his phone, right there in the lawyer's office. Then David advised him to officially file for divorce. We have all the evidence we need to make this divorce go quickly. No arguments over property, no alimony, just a clean break. We'll use this to force her to agree to our terms. Michael nodded. He didn't need her money. He needed his freedom. Next came the other steps. Michael hired a team to change all the locks on the house. This was the most symbolic step for him. He was locking the door to the past. He was sealing off his old life. When he returned to the house, he saw that everything was quiet. Sarah was gone. There were 2 large suitcases on the doorstep. He didn't bother to look inside them. He didn't care. He simply handed them to the workers to place them in the garage and went to change the locks. When the new key clicked in the door, he didn't feel joy or relief, but simply finality. This was the end. He spent the rest of the day packing his things. He went into their bedroom. Everything was just as he had left it. Sarah's clothes were on a chair. Her perfume was on the dresser. He wanted to throw it all away, but he held back. He only packed his own belongings, carefully placing them into boxes. He felt like a stranger in this house. Now he was like a visitor who had come to a museum to look at artifacts from a past, long-forgotten era. This house was no longer his home. It was just a place where he had lived with a woman he thought he loved. He felt empty. The emotions had vanished, leaving behind only a cold, bitter resolve to start over.
Michael sat on a strange, uncomfortable bed in a rented apartment that felt like a temporary shelter. The walls were bare, without photos or memories. This was his new world, a blank slate on which he had to write his new story. All of his past life was contained in 3 large boxes that he had brought with him. He placed them in a corner and didn't want to touch them, because each one was filled not only with things, but also with ghosts of his past. Rain fell outside the window, and its drumming against the glass was the only sound that broke the silence. He could destroy her life. He could upload all the evidence he had found online. He could humiliate her in front of all her colleagues, friends, and even Robert's family. He could send photos of her lies to her parents so they would know what their perfect daughter was truly like. He had everything he needed to get revenge. Revenge seemed like such a simple and sweet solution, but then he imagined what would happen. She would suffer, and he probably would too. He would have to relive all that pain over and over, watch her tears, listen to her excuses. He realized that revenge would not bring him relief. It would only prolong his suffering. He didn't want to be a hostage to her lies. He wanted to be free. Sitting in that empty room, he realized his choice was simple. Either he would live in the past, seeking revenge for what was taken from him, or he would live in the future, building something new. He couldn't get back the 7 years that he had lost, but he could save what he had left, his soul. He picked up his laptop and phone. His hands were not trembling. His movements were confident and calm. He opened the folder where the chat screenshots, copies of bank accounts, photos, and documents were stored. He looked at them. They weren't just files. They were testaments to his pain. He pressed delete. All the folders disappeared, one by one. He did the same on his phone. Now there was no evidence left, except for his memories. And that was his main decision. He wasn't trying to forget. He was simply deciding not to let this lie control his life. His next step was to write a letter. He didn't write it to Sarah. He wrote it to David. In it, he laid out his position. He would not seek compensation. He would not cause a scandal. There would be nothing but a clean, quiet divorce. He left everything they had acquired together to her. The house, the car, the accounts, everything. The only thing he needed was his freedom. He sent the letter and felt a heavy weight fall from his shoulders. It was his final break with the past. Then he went to the window and looked out at the city. It was foreign to him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that he was free. He was ready to start over. He had no plans, no dreams as he did before. He only knew that he had to move forward. He picked up his phone and dialed the number of an old friend he hadn't seen in years. "Hey Chris, it's Michael. I'm in Chicago. How about we get coffee?" This was his first step, not into a new life,
but onto his new path where he was no longer dependent on Sarah, her lies, or her betrayal.
A year had passed. Michael stood on the shore of Lake Michigan, watching the waves roll onto the beach with a gentle murmur. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in incredible shades of orange and purple. He no longer lived in Chicago. He had moved to a small town on the coast where no one knew him. His new apartment was small but cozy, with large windows that looked directly out at the lake. His life was no longer like a perfectly tuned machine. It was like the lake itself, calm on the surface, but with deep and unpredictable currents beneath. He no longer worked in finance. After the divorce, he had left everything and took a long break. He traveled, read the books he had always wanted to read but never had the time for. He learned how to fish and cook simple meals. He realized that happiness wasn't about big money or a perfect image. Happiness was an internal state. It was in the small things. He learned to find joy in watching a sunset, in the smell of coffee in the morning, in the sound of the waves. He found new friends, simple and honest people who never asked too many questions. He told them his story. They didn't judge him. They simply listened. And that was the most important thing for him. He no longer felt like a stranger. He was himself, a man who had been through pain but had not been broken. One day, as he was sitting in a local cafe, he saw her. She was sitting at a table with a man and two little girls. It was Robert and his daughters. And she was Sarah. Michael felt his heart clench, but not from pain, from surprise. She looked happy. She was laughing, and her laughter was as genuine as the one he had once known. But now it wasn't meant for him. They didn't notice him. Michael just watched them. He saw Robert gently holding her hand, saw the girls laughing. There was nothing fake about it. She had found her world. Michael turned away and walked out. He felt neither rage nor regret. He felt closure. His story with her was over. That evening he returned home, brewed himself some tea, and sat on his balcony, watching the sunset. He no longer felt like a victim. He was a survivor. He had lost everything, but he had found himself. He had found his soul, his peace, and his right to be happy. His life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he didn't think he would ever dial again. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to tell you that I'm okay. Everything's good." He smiled. It wasn't just a phrase. It was his new truth. He was free.
A few more months passed, and Michael's life found a new, peaceful rhythm. He still lived by the lake, but now he had a job at a small local firm, with no stress or backstabbing. He was dating, meeting people, but not rushing into anything. He wasn't looking for a perfect picture. He was simply living. His wound had healed, leaving behind only a small but solid scar. It was a reminder of what he had endured, but it no longer caused him pain. One day, as he was walking down the main street of the town, he saw her. She was standing at the entrance of a coffee shop, talking on the phone. She was alone. Michael stopped. He didn't know what to do. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and there was none of the radiance he remembered in her eyes. She looked like a shadow of the woman he had once known. She was dressed in simple clothes, without the expensive brands she had loved so much. It was clear that life had not been kind to her. Sarah noticed him. Her eyes widened, and she slowly lowered her phone. For a moment, they both stood still like two statues, separated by 7 years of lies and 1 year of solitude. She didn't smile. He didn't frown. They just stood and looked at each other. Michael felt neither rage nor pity, only emptiness. It was as if he were looking at a stranger he had once read about in a book. "Michael, Her voice was quiet, full of uncertainty. He remained silent. What was there for him to say? He had already said everything. He just nodded. I'm sorry. For everything, she whispered. Michael nodded again. He didn't believe her words. She wasn't saying it to him, but to herself. She wasn't seeking forgiveness, but trying to clear her own conscience. How are you? She asked. I'm fine, Sarah, he said, and his voice was firm and calm. He no longer felt pain. He no longer felt anything. He was free. He was ready to leave. He looked into her eyes one last time, and in that moment he realized that he no longer saw Jessica Evans in her, but he didn't see his Sarah either. She was just a woman he had once known. He felt a sense of complete closure. He turned and walked on without looking back. He knew he would never see her again. His life was his, and he didn't need anything from the past.
Michael returned to his small apartment by the lake. Outside, it was still night, but in the east, the first barely visible light was already breaking. The past was behind him. The final meeting was the final chapter. He no longer felt pain or bitterness. The emptiness that had consumed him a year ago had been slowly filled, not with a new love or great successes, but with calm and inner peace. He realized that happiness was not a destination, but a process. He hadn't found a new perfect life. He had found himself, and that was enough. He walked to the window and leaned against the cold glass. The sunrise was slow but inevitable. The first rays of sun touched the surface of the lake, painting it in golden and pink hues. In that moment, he realized that his life hadn't been destroyed. It had been purified. Purified of lies, of fake ideals, of someone else's dream. He remembered how he had once chased a perfect picture, a perfect house, a perfect wife, a perfect career. Now he knew that all of it was just dust that prevented him from seeing his true self. Today, he was a different man. He was free. He was no longer Michael, the perfect husband, nor was he Jessica Evans, the captive of another's life. He was just himself, a man who had survived betrayal, found the strength to start over, and build a life that belonged only to him. He didn't try to forget the past. He simply learned to live with it. He knew that the Michael who had believed in perfection was gone, and a new Michael was born. The one who knew that life wasn't perfect, but it could be honest. He took a deep breath, and the air that filled his lungs felt clean and fresh. His heart beat steadily, without the frantic rhythm he had felt when he was uncovering the lies. His life was like this new dawn, fresh, unknown, full of light. And it belonged only to him.